Hi guys, it's Narelle Cook from Canine Pharmaceuticals and welcome to another week of Thursday's Thoughts. This is where I share bite-sized pieces of scientific information that I find really interesting and I hope you do too. So this week, we're looking at the macronutrient intake of dogs, self-selecting diets varying in composition offered ad libitum. So published in 2017 in the Journal of Animal Physiology and Animal Nutrition. Oh, it actually says 2018. There you go. So basically what these authors were looking at, so they're saying that, the diet of the domestic dog has changed so significantly from that of its wolf ancestor over, generations. And they're asking the questions, with such radical dietary changes, what do dogs actually want to eat? What is their preference? Because we know that most commercial dog foods, unfortunately, particularly kibble, can be up to 60% carbohydrate, which is, vastly different to what a wolf would have consumed. And I know our dogs, they're not wolves, but, there is a connection in terms of evolution and diet. So we need to, still take that into consideration. And they comment in this paper that, when they look at the diet of wolves, I think it's in there somewhere, but, maybe they self-select around 54% protein, 45% fat, and 1% carbohydrate by energy. And so the authors are like, well, what do domestic pet dogs prefer if they're given a choice? So what they did, they had 15 dogs, and what's really interesting, they actually gave them a diet that provided 500% of their daily energy requirements. And the reason that that's quite good to do is, like, we know when we're hungry, we'll pretty much eat anything, and our dogs are the same. But when we're like completely satiated and stuffed, we become a little bit more picky and selective about what we want to eat. So that's what they offered these dogs just so much like energy from food. How would that impact them? So they had 3 different diets, that just had different amounts of protein, fat, and carbohydrate. Each diet had exactly the same ingredients, just in different ratios to give those different macronutrient percentages. So if we just skip straight to the results to keep things short and sweet. Okay, so what they found, this figure 2 here on the left, this is looking at energy consumption. And they found that on day 1, so the study went for 10 days, day 1, pretty much the dogs just gorged. And what they're saying, that's pretty much an evolutionary feature where, animals had that feast or famine sort of response built into them, because they, never know, or they didn't know when their next meal might be coming. So when they found food, they would just like gorge and eat as much of it as possible in case, there was a famine and there wasn't a meal the next day or the next day. So they found that with the domestic dogs as well, that they pretty much pigged out. And then as the 10 days went on, they started to better regulate and sort of eat less. So that makes sense. This is really interesting, figure 3. So the blue bars, so we've got high protein on the left, high fat in the middle, high carb on the right. The blue bar is indicating which diet did the dogs approach first. And the orange bar is indicating which diet did they actually eat first. So if we look at the high protein diet, so 47% of dogs approached the high protein diet in the first instance. And of those dogs, just over 64% of them actually consume that as their first choice. Now you compare that to the high carb diet over here. So 24% of dogs actually approached the high carb diet in the first instance, but of those dogs, only just over 3% actually decided to eat the high carb diet ahead of trying the high fat or the high protein diet. So, I mean, that just screams that they're not super interested in carbs already. This is really interesting. This actually made me laugh when I first read what it was. This is the percentage of diet that were completely avoided. So I can't see quickly what that percentage is, but this is the high carbohydrate diet in green. So it looks like 60%-ish of dogs absolutely avoided, like completely avoided the high carbohydrate diet. A smaller amount avoided the high fat diet altogether, and only like a tiny percentage weren't interested in the high protein diet. Again, they found that initially the dogs preferred the high fat diet. And again, they put it down to that sort of evolutionary, like this provides more energy. You know, we need to prepare in case there's a famine. But that decreased over time. It's hard to tell, but the carbohydrate intake also decreased over time, but it was so low already, you can't really see that. Interestingly, the protein content remained, or consumption, I should say, remained fairly stable. And this is in terms of energy, metabolizable energy, remained fairly stable across the 10-day trial period. One of the explanations that they give for the reduction in fat consumption over the trial period is that, you know, this large increase in fat initially would have started to increase body fat stores. And when that happens, we've got a hormone called leptin, which is a satiety hormone. So it would have started to tell the dogs that, okay, we're starting to put on fat. Maybe, you know, we don't need to eat as much fat anymore, and let's sort of reduce calories and so forth. So how interesting is that? The paper goes on talking about all of that. So, and there was only 2 other studies that had looked at this. The first study was quite a while ago. I think they said they only looked at protein intake. The second study, which was about 12 years ago from memory, did look at protein, carbs, and fat, and found similar sort of trends in, you know, the preference of dogs. Definitely carbohydrates was the least preferred. And yeah, in this study, they found that just over 3% of the dogs preferred like a diet that had around 3% of carbohydrate matter. So that's really important to think about. You know, have a look at the bag that you're, the bag of dog food that you're feeding, and it won't actually tell you the carbohydrate percentage, which is pretty dodgy from pet food manufacturers as far as I'm concerned. Some companies are starting to put that information on there, but because it's accepted by all the official feeding guidelines that dogs have absolutely no requirement for carbohydrates, that's why it's not a requirement on the pet food label. But I'll have to do a how to calculate carbohydrates in your dog's food Thursday's thought, just so you know. It's super easy how to calculate it yourself, but we'll do that another day. But in the meantime, please let us all know in the comments, have you experimented with what your dog might prefer to eat? Like, I know there are people I know that will have a board and they'll put the meal as separate ingredients on the board and let the dog like naturally choose what it wants to eat first and so forth, what it wants to avoid potentially. Like, have you done this? What have you discovered that your dog likes or doesn't like? Have you noticed a difference between like the protein and fat rich foods and potentially carbohydrate rich foods? Yeah, super curious to hear of your experience. And if you find this quite shocking, and you look at what's in your dog food and you see lots of soy, corn, wheat, rice, lentils, peas, that's a high carbohydrate diet. And if you'd like to learn how to shift away from that to a more species appropriate diet, please reach out to us at info@canineseuticals.com.au. That's what we're here for. We can absolutely guide you in feeding a more appropriate diet for your dog. Definitely check out the resources section of our website. That's canineseuticals.com.au. We've got blogs, we've got guides, we've got podcasts. There's a great allergy guide if you've got a dog with allergies. So check that out. But as always, thank you for another week of Thursday's Thoughts, and I will see you next week.